Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the speaker series presentation. We have a really special treat with today's guest, Dr. Laurie Santos. Now, if I were presenting Dr. Santos at my kids' elementary school, I would lead with some of her most important credentials. Number one, she uses science to help teenagers and adults be happier and healthier. Number two, she has a podcast called The Happiness Lab that has over 45 million downloads. Number three, she works with dogs and monkeys to better understand how they think. You can see cute pictures of them on her website. And number four, she counts Elmo as a colleague. I'm pretty sure she would have their attention at this point. For this audience, however, I will add a few more details. Dr. Laurie Santos is the Chandrika and Ranjan Tandon Professor of Psychology and Head of Silliman College at Yale University. In 2018, she developed a course at Yale called Psychology and the Good Life, which teaches a scientifically validated set of strategies for living a more meaningful and fulfilling life. She created the course because she saw the rising rates of depression and anxiety among college students. Approximately half of Yale's student population seeks out mental health services at some time during their time on campus, and recognized that students were focused on things like grades and getting into the right school, rather than concepts like generosity, gratitude, curiosity, and compassion, which we know are associated with a more flourishing life. As it turns out, a lot of students were looking for a course like this. Psychology and the Good Life quickly became the most popular course at Yale, but its impact extends beyond Yale's campus. Dr. Santos transferred the university-based curriculum to Coursera, an open online instruction platform, and over 4.5 million people around the world have enrolled in the course. With the success of her course among adults and college-age students, she then began thinking about translating her work for a younger audience, and this is where JTF comes in. In June of 2022, our board approved a 3-year grant that would allow Dr. Santos to adapt her curriculum and deliver it both in classrooms and directly to adolescents on platforms like YouTube and Coursera. The Coursera course went live this past January, and it already has over 136,000 individuals enrolled, and their educator website has over 6,000 users. This work has received mentions or features in a variety of media outlets, including Edweek, Time, The Washington Post, NPR, NBC Nightly News, and many others. And did I mention she knows Elmo? Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Laurie Santos.
Thank you so much. This is, I speak in a lot of spots, but it's actually a real honor to speak at the foundation. Even back when I was doing monkey work, all the way back in the day, the foundation was really pivotal in getting my career going. I actually learned about positive psychology and the science of flourishing for the first time through a positive neuroscience grant at Penn with Marty Seligman. So the foundation has really been pivotal to this whole story, not just the kind of recent grant that we got. So it's a real honor to be here. But what I wanted to do today was to tell you kind of this story. I think it's inspiring for grant makers to kind of see the trajectory that leads to different ideas, that leads to the kind of different outcomes that you all fund. And so I was going to tell you a little bit of the story about how I got interested in the science of flourishing and kind of how we wound up doing this class for young people and what we're up to now. But in the context of that story, I'm going to kind of do a deep dive onto the content that I teach my students a little bit too. I'm supposed to speak for 35 minutes, so I can't give you all 26-week lectures that I give my Yale students. But I know that this is a foundation where you really all practice what you preach, or maybe better, practice what you fund, as it were. And so I thought it was worth having a reminder of how you all can protect your well-being too. And so we'll kind of give you the story of how this course came along and what we've been up to, but also give it a little mini deep dive so that you can take time to think about your own well-being. And hopefully at the end, we'll have lots of time for conversation and questions and so on. But just to get started, as mentioned, I'm a faculty member here at Yale. I've been teaching there for over 2 decades, which makes me feel very old. But in just the last 5 years, I took on this new role on campus where I became what's called a head of college. So Yale is one of these strange campuses like in Harry Potter where there's like Gryffindor, Slytherin, there's like colleges within a college. I'm head of Silliman College, and that means as a faculty member, I live on campus with students, right? So I see their lives up close and personal. I'm eating with them in the dining hall, I'm hanging out with them in the trenches. And I was honestly shocked when I took on this new role about what I was seeing. I was seeing this so-called college student mental health crisis up close and personal, right? It was very different than when I was in college back in the late 90s. Just to give you a sense nationally, I know the foundation doesn't like to focus on the doom and gloom side of things. We want to look at kind of above the kind of level, but I think it's important to see how bad things are. So right now, nationally, more than 40% of college students report being too depressed to function most days. More than 65% of college students say they're overwhelmingly anxious to the point that it's difficult to get work done. More than 50% of college students say they're very lonely most of the time. This was a shocker to me, one that I saw in the trenches. You know, this is a time of students' life when they're living with other people with similar interests and their same ages. And more than half of them report being very lonely, which is the highest bit of loneliness you could report on the scale. And this winds up in some really kind of terrible mental health statistics. Like right now, nationally, more than 1 in 10 college students has seriously considered suicide in the last 5 months, right? Again, these are way lower than what we want. We want to boost people up so that they can flourish. But right now, the situation among our young people nationally is that things are really not looking good. And that's what I saw in my community. Like I just saw levels of panic attacks and anxiety disorders just skyrocketing. And as a kind of benevolent kind of aunt to these students in my college, I said, we have to do something about this. And so the question I sort of asked myself is like, what can I, as just an academic teaching these students, do to help this crisis in young people's flourishing? What can I do better? And I thought, well, hang on, as faculty members, we actually have access to the possibility of teaching students new strategies. And we can teach those new strategies in part because social science has come a long way. We actually have, in part because of the funding that you all do, we actually have whole sciences built on what we can do to increase people's generosity, to increase their sense of compassion, to both to others and themselves. We know about the kinds of skill sets that we can bring in to help people do a little bit better. We know what we can do to fight this crisis, but somehow that knowledge wasn't getting translated, definitely wasn't getting translated as practical skills that our students were getting so they could put it into practice themselves. So I said, okay, I'll do this. Having trained with Marty on positive neuroscience, I kind of had access to his syllabi and other syllabi. I said, let me just develop a class that teaches students all these practical strategies. I'll kind of slap together everything we know about how to improve flourishing, teach it to students, and then kind of allow them to engage with this in a sort of graded way. I couldn't grade students on engaging in acts of compassion and things like that, but I could put it in this syllabus. And with type A Yale students, it turns out that was enough. If you just give a date and say, be compassionate, or give a date, be generous, those students will do it even without a grade. So this was the idea behind the course, but I thought, you know, it's a new psych class on campus, maybe 30 students are going to show up. You heard the punchline of the story, but I did not expect it to look, I expected it to look a little bit like this. Maybe this was a little bit on the high end, but it looked like that. A quarter of the entire Yale student body came out to take the class the first time I taught it, which created a whole host of logistical nightmares. Turns out it's not good if your class, the only spot your class can fit is in the football stadium or the concert hall. It's like a little bit problematic logistically. But I think this tells us something really important. I think it tells us today's young people don't like this culture. They want to be flourishing. They don't want to feel burned out. They want to have strategies to do better. And I think they really want evidence-based strategies, right? They want to know what is the science saying that they can do better, right? And so this was the kind of story of the class, but now I kind of want to do a deep dive of what students learn in class, right? Is I think one of the interesting things about teaching this class came out kind of after I taught it, which is that it went viral not just on campus, but kind of everywhere. Like in news media cycles all around the world, people wanted to learn what are these students in class learning? And I think that tells us something about the sign of the times that we're living in. Yes, most of my projects right now are focused on young people's mental health, but I think when we really look at it, this is the kind of thing that so many of us need right now. I think these days we're feeling all a little bit more burned out than ever, a little bit more anxious than ever about political polarization, what's happening in the climate, the sort of things that are happening in the world. I think many of us individually are worried about family members, maybe worried about ourselves, right? I think there's a kind of crisis in flourishing that's especially happening among young people, but I think we're all kind of feeling it a little bit. And so the question is, what can we each do to kind of like bring that flourishing back to us? And as I said, I wish I had much longer. My whole 26 weeks of content I have to squish down into 3 principles. But I'm going to do that just here, and then we can kind of talk about other ones. But I think these are 3 central tenets that we talk about in class. And they're also 3 central tenets that Sir John realized even back in the day were going to be really important for a flourishing life, right? And so one of the tenets that we talk about with students is this idea that if we really want to flourish ourselves, we need to focus on helping others. helping others winds up making us happier than we expect. And so if I had to kind of boil all of positive psychology down into a single principle, it is that other people matter for our happiness. Chris Peterson, I think, said there's no happy hermits, right? Like other people and social connection tremendously matter for our happiness. So much so that if you take any survey of happy people, what you find is that happy people tend to be more social, right? They tend to make time for their friends and family members, but they also tend to just physically spend time more around other people, something I think is going wrong in our young people. But there's a particular tenet to some of this stuff that I think is even more important, which is it's not just spending time with other people. It's how you interact with other people. It's how you think about other people's values. And I think this is a spot where we can get off track a little bit, because when we think about kind of what we can do to make ourselves feel happier, often it winds up in the modern culture getting us to think very selfishly, right? If you watch Parks and Recs, there's this kind of treat yourself mentality, right? But look at any magazine article and you're going to see terms like self-care. I think the problem is that when you look at the scientific literature, flourishing doesn't look like it's about self-care. It looks like it's about becoming more and more other-oriented. One of the things we know is that if you do surveys of happy people, what you find is that happy people tend to be pretty other-oriented, controlled for income. Happier people tend to report giving more money to charity than people who self-report not being so happy. And this is true internationally from data sets like Lara Akman's and others. It just seems like happiness seems to go along with being more other-oriented. But you all are savvy science types, and you might be like, well, hey, that's just a correlation. It could be that, helping other people makes you happier, or it could be that being happier makes you kind of maybe motivated to help other people, right? Kind of which is it? And so we need some clever studies to disambiguate this. And one of my favorite clever studies that I talk about with students in my class comes from the work of Liz Dunn and her colleagues at the University of British Columbia. And she does a study where she forces people to do nice stuff for other people. In fact, she forces people to spend money on others. She does this very easily. She finds college students on the street, walks up to them and says, hey, do you want to be in a study? People say yes. She hands them $20, but then she tells them how to spend the money. She either says, hey, here's, it's 20 Canadian and UBC, but you get the picture. But here's $20. Either spend this $20 to do something nice for yourself, treat yourself, or spend this $20 to do something nice for other people. And then she agrees that she's going to call you later in the day. You're going to fill out one of our standard self-report scales on happiness, and we're just going to compare these two conditions. And what Liz finds is both at the end of the day and at the end of the week, the people who spend the money on others wind up being happier than those who spent the same equivalent amount of money on themselves. She, in collaboration with Lara Akman, has subsequently run these kind of studies with larger sums of money. She does this, as a foundation, you might get this. It's okay to have her run 200 subjects with the $20, but you don't want to be giving like thousands of dollars away to people. She was able to test this by taking those same Canadian sums of money to rural Uganda, where that same amount of money is a big amount of money. Those are sums of money that we would pay to get a latte, but that's getting someone's HIV medication for a month or giving food for their family for several weeks, right? But what she finds is even in that domain, spending the money on other people makes you happier than spending the money on yourself. And so this is top insight number one. Again, I think the virtues sort of recognize this really early on. Generosity matters for our flourishing. It's not all about us in this way that we sometimes expect. And so for your own happiness, and as you think about your work at the foundation, I think it's important to remember that helping others matters. And I think this is something that in our workplaces we can forget. Of course, as a college professor, as a podcaster, sharing this stuff, I'm helping people. But it's hard in that moment of grading the papers to remember that. I think in the foundation, this is something for you all to remember, right? Ultimately, you might be in the trenches doing some part of this work that's not fun, but your goal is to actually change knowledge, right? Your goal is to help scientists be able to do their best work. And so ultimately, if you can get back to reframing your job as something where it's helping, that can kind of give you the kind of flourishing benefit that comes as well. So that's top insight number one from the course. Top insight number two from the course builds on a mindset we know that the foundation has focused on a lot, which is that research seems to show that gratitude matters a lot for our flourishing. This idea of gratitude, feeling thankful for all that you have, it's something that's in the sort of cultural parlance, but it might not be cultural practice. It's kind of like grandmotherly wisdom, but not grandmotherly practice, right? And the kind of scenario I invite people to often think about is imagine the last time you maybe got together with a friend you hadn't seen in a while, a really close friend, like they asked, how's it going? My guess is that you probably didn't list every single blessing in your life, your health and all the things. You probably talked about the one thing in your life that was really needling at you, that was going really bad, right? That's the way minds work. Work by Kylie Hamlin, another foundation recipient, and her colleagues has shown that even from 3 months of age, babies seem to have a negativity bias, right? Where their brains go to the bad stuff in the world. And this is the problem for a mindset of gratitude, which is that it's really just hard to bring our minds to the blessing unless we practice it. But research has shown that if you can force yourself to do that, you wind up experiencing more life satisfaction, more positive emotion, and overall higher levels of flourishing reported. One famous study by Sonia Lubomirsky and her colleagues has just found that the simple act of scribbling down 3 to 5 things you're grateful for every day can begin significantly improving your well-being in as little as 2 weeks, again, on these sort of standard self-report measures, right? But it's not just feelings of flourishing that come when you experience more gratitude. Gratitude winds up helping you solve other stuff that the foundation cares about. Things, for example, like self-regulation, right? Temperance and so on. Research by Dave DeSteno and colleagues has found that individuals who experience more gratitude are more likely to take into account their future self. Gratitude is this wonderful pro-social emotion. So you feel like, I got mine right now, I can give back to the future. He finds that individuals wind up eating healthier when they experience more gratitude. When you do gratitude interventions and get people to think more about the things that they're thankful for, they wind up saving more for retirement. And in the wonderful kind of reciprocation that we tend to see in social science when we look at virtues, when you make people more grateful, they're more likely to do pro-social acts for others. Dave DeSteno has this lovely experiment where he does this quick intervention to either get people to think about something they're grateful for, some other control positive emotion condition, and then they stumble into the hall and there's someone who spilled their papers and needs some help. And the question is just how long will that person help? And what you find is in the gratitude condition, people wind up helping others even longer than you expect. And so there's this nice reciprocation between kind of pro-social behaviors of generosity and kindness and these feelings of gratitude. But what I find most interesting is work showing that the expression of gratitude winds up helping us even more than just the feelings of it. Sometimes these gratitude moments are sort of felt privately. You just kind of list down or sort of feel the things that you're grateful for. But there's also work suggesting that expressing gratitude to other people can have a big impact on our flourishing, maybe even a longer lasting impact on our flourishing. Why? This is why if you were actually in my course, you'd get like your little mini midterm exam. Why does it matter? Well, it's getting social connections. So you're just talking to people when you express gratitude to someone. You're kind of doing something nice for other people because other people appreciate it when you thank them. And you're kind of experiencing the gratitude yourself. And there's a whole host of studies that have shown the power of this effect. I know you all are fans of Marty's work, so I pulled one of those. This is an older paper, so the data aren't perfect, but thought I would showcase some of Marty's old stuff. This is a study he did back in 2005 with Chris Peterson and colleagues, where he had his participants engage in what he calls a gratitude visit. So the prompt goes like this. In the next week, I want you to write a letter of gratitude to someone who's helped you or been especially kind to you, but has never properly been thanked. Then deliver that letter in person to the person in question. You all are a lot more polite than my Yale students. When I presented this to my Yale students, one of them screamed out emo, which is sort of college students speak for like, oh, this is gonna be awkward, too emotional, like, ugh, right? And that's what some of us feel, right? This kind of might be somebody you haven't talked to in a while. But it turns out that the feelings you get from this, the prediction you predicted is gonna feel kind of emo and a little awkward. But what actually happens is much better. And so here's just, I'm going to nerd out and show you Marty's data. Here's his kind of standard measure of happiness. And we can talk about this, but most of our measures are these sort of well psychometrically tested self-report measures. This is the one that Marty was using. The white bars are when his subjects engage in a gratitude visit. The black bars are when people do a control where you just list some happy memories. And what Marty finds is no difference before the gratitude visit, a small but significant difference in people's overall happiness after the gratitude visit. And bracketed, this is important. All the effects we're talking about are usually small but significant effects. We're not taking people from 0 to 100, but if we do enough of these, we might be able to boost people up. But the reason I love showing this old study is that Marty actually followed people out for up to 6 months. And what he finds is that this small but significant impact in people's happiness seems to last from anywhere between 1 to 3 months based on his data set, which is kind of cool. If I told you there was something that you could do today, we're having this conversation in June that might bump up your happiness in a small but significant way that would last till maybe Labor Day, like end of summer, you'd be like, that's amazing. And that's the simple power of expressing gratitude to others. So that's a top set of insights number 2 that we talk about in the course, is that our mindsets really matter. Like these thinking things can really have a huge effect on our flourishing. The final thing I focus a lot on with students, was my PowerPoint's doing something a little weird here, is top insight number 3, which is that if we really want to kind of follow what the science is telling us, we need to focus on yet another virtue that the foundation talks about a lot, compassion. But we really need to think about engaging in compassion, not necessarily just to other people, but for ourselves. We know the power of expressing compassion to others, expressing kindness. We've just talked about it. But the problem is that we rarely extend that compassion and kindness to ourselves. And I think this is a big problem for our young people today, too. I often joke that if HR could hear the way we talk to ourselves, we'd all get fired because we would never, ever say what we say to ourselves to a colleague. And we do this in part not because we're masochists, but because we believe it works. We have a set of beliefs about how we can push ourselves and motivate ourselves. But social scientists can go out and test that. They have, people like Kristen Neff and others. And they've found that that kind of self-criticism, that sort of drill instructor mode of talking to ourselves, it simply doesn't work in the way we think. It makes us less productive. It makes us procrastinate more. In fact, we'd engage more self-regulation and motivate ourselves to do more and better stuff if we could engage more self-compassion, just treating ourselves like we would a close friend. I think some of the best work on this in the book I have with my students read is Kristen Neff's book on self-compassion. But she talks a lot about the sort of 3 parts of self-compassion. One is one that the foundation thinks about a lot, mindfulness, being present, noticing what's happening, right? You have to notice what's going on. In the case of self-compassion, you sometimes have to notice that things aren't going so well, right? I'm feeling really stressed right now. I'm feeling burned out and overwhelmed, right? The second part of self-compassion, though, is a sense of common humanity, this kind of extending that agape love to yourself. You say, and it's normal to be stressed out right now because I'm just human, right? Everybody gets stressed out right now. You kind of extend that humanity that you would give to others to yourself. And then you engage in acts of self-kindness, often asking yourself things like, how can I take care of myself? What do I need right now? And so on. It seems like a simple practice and it doesn't have great marketing. It sounds a little cheesy, but Neff and others find this can have huge, huge effects. One of the big effects that Kristen Neff and her colleagues find is it can actually reduce rates of PTSD in soldiers. Neff does work with Iraqi and Afghani combat veterans and finds that teaching them these 3 steps, these practices of self-compassion, can reduce rates of PTSD when they get back. But beyond that, it can also help, self-regulation closer to home. This too, when you engage in self-compassion, winds up making it easier to be nicer to your future self. So people with more self-compassion eat healthier. They're less likely to procrastinate. And most importantly, engaging in self-compassion is a great way to practice compassion broadly. It's hard to extend compassion to yourself. As you get good at that, you become much more compassionate to your partners, to your teammates, to your kids, and so on. And because self-compassion can be hard, I also do some work to teach my students some practical strategies to do this. We tend to know what compassionate touch looks like when we're engaging in touch with other people. If I kind of give my kid a hug, or give my good friend kind of squeeze their hand and so on, we forget how to extend that to ourselves. But in Inroad, I teach my students that they, again, laugh at a little bit, but then find, oh, this is really helpful, is to give yourself self-compassionate touch. And I'll invite you all to try it out. Just to give yourself, we're all friends here, give yourself a little hug, kind of feel it out, and notice just what happens to your breathing as you do that, even subtly, right? This is a quick technique that Neff encourages whenever you're kind of feeling upset. And then she recommends going through those 3 steps. Mindfulness. This is tough right now. I'm struggling right now. I'm stressed right now. This isn't good. Self-compassion. But common humanity, but stress is a part of life. I'm only human. This is normal. Failure is normal, right? And then sort of self-kindness. What can I take off my plate? How can I be kind to myself? How can I treat myself like a friend? And so that's top insight number 3 that we talk about from the class. Self-compassion winds up being an important way to improve your flourishing and get all these other benefits like better self-regulation and so on. I don't have time to go through the other 26 lectures, but you get a chance to kind of see. We're seeing some science. We're also getting some practical strategies for how we can do better, right? But that was the class, right? And so here I am teaching this class for the first time. It goes viral on campus. What I didn't expect was to get so much attention from outside the class. First of all, immediately upon teaching this class, I started getting lots of attention from other universities. Other universities said, hey, we need this kind of class too, including universities that were closer to home. I was kind of like, well, Marty's doing this stuff at Penn. You don't have to put me against. But anyway, all these students started saying, we want this too. But again, it wasn't just students. It was people around the world who were talking about this. About 2 weeks into the class, we had this New York Times article that came out about the class. And that opened the floodgates for the press who were coming to the class. Every other lecture, I had a major national news organization filming the lecture, which if you are preparing a class for the first time for academics, you're like, oh gosh, please let the PowerPoint not have typos. I don't know what's going on. But this got a lot of attention, and not just in the US, internationally, right? There are all these articles written about the class around the world. If you speak these languages, you can tell me what these things are saying about my class, because I genuinely don't know what they're saying. Hopefully it's good stuff. But the point is, this really caused me to realize that it's going to be useful not just to leave these insights at Yale, right? And the great thing about Yale is that they have groups on campus that really care about digital learning and getting Yale education out to as many people as possible. And so we partnered with the Coursera group for teaching and learning at Yale to kind of film a version of the class that could be given around the world. And so we filmed it. This is my head of college house on campus with students, kind of had a film crew come in and set it up. And we filmed it almost like a salon where I was sort of talking to a small group of students. So it felt kind of homey. It felt kind of nice. It felt like it would be accessible to anyone. And so we put that class online as the Science of Wellbeing on Coursera.org, a great partner. And it too went a little bit viral. We now have over 4.5 million learners. And just to see how when these things really hit, we can affect lots of people. Here's just a map of the world where we have learners for that Coursera course right now. Like, it's really incredible when you put this stuff out there, how many people you can reach. But the question we wanted to ask is this actually doing its job, right? Like, we want this to kind of get people to flourish more, but is the content actually doing that, right? We wanted to actually empirically test whether or not this was helping. And so we teamed up with David Yaden, who at the time was working in Marty's group at Penn. He's now a professor at Johns Hopkins, and a whole team at Yale University to try to assess this. And our approach was to say, okay, let's see if we can measure it flourishing with standard measures before and after students take my Science of Wellbeing class. And we'll compare that with some control condition because we want to have something to compare it to. And for that, we picked another psych class that Yale has on Coursera, Intro to Psych. It's my colleague Paul Bloom's class. The idea was both our psych classes, both are talking about content, same length, but one is giving you these evidence-based strategies that we know scientifically improve flourishing, and one is not. And the measure that we used is the standard measure that Marty's group and others have used, what's called PERMA. It's a self-report measure that measures these sort of 5 aspects of flourishing. So it's really kind of tapping into flourishing on all these different levels. And I'll just show you the kind of graph of what we're finding. I'm plotting this PERMA measure kind of squished down to a 10-point measure as is typical. The white bars will be the Science of Wellbeing versus Intro Psych from before the class to after the class. And what we find is something interesting. First, students who take any psychology class seem to significantly improve their well-being, which as an academic makes my heart swim, right? It's like, we're helping them, yay. But the cool thing is that over and above just taking a psych class, it seems like taking the Science of Wellbeing is improving people's well-being. And just to give you a sense of the scale on this, assume, I measured your well-being on a standard 10-point scale, from a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling right now? What we're seeing is that students are going up about 1.5 points after taking the class. So again, we're not going from 0 to 100, but we're making a small but meaningful difference, right? If students are going up from a 7 to an 8.5 or from a 5 to a 6.5, that actually really matters. But this was all online. We said, are we still reaching students in the live version of the class? To test this question, I was able to partner up with the University of Bristol in the UK. One of the things that happened was when all these schools published articles in their student newspapers that said, we need this class, I got literally hundreds of emails from colleagues being like, can I have your syllabus? And I just kind of doled it out, here. Some of them became classes, and some of them actually contacted me and kept in touch about how it was going. And one of those folks was Bruce Hood at the University of Bristol, who said, let's not just run this class, but let's actually test whether or not it's improving people's well-being over time in the live version. And so Bruce was able to test this in a live 4-credit class that ran across fall and spring semesters. He did this in fall of 2019 versus a waitlist control. And so the nice thing about the University of Bristol for being able to test this is very hard to get controls for some of these things where is like students who are as interested and so on. So what Bruce was able to do is the class was offered for 2 semesters, and students randomly got assigned to whether they were going to get it in the fall or the spring. So we could use those spring students who hadn't got it yet as a kind of waitlist control to see what happened. And the standard survey he used, he's from Britain, so they use the British version of these surveys. So they use the Warwick-Edinburgh Wellbeing Scale. And here's what we find. The students in the white who are taking the class wind up showing significant effects on this survey from before and after, whereas the other students were pretty flatlined. So that's sort of cool. But this course wound up having an interesting natural experiment, because if you notice the semesters that Bruce was running this, fall 2019, the world was fine, everything was good. And then, like dumpster fire, like when it comes to our collective flourishing, right? So it gave us this natural experiment. That survey was done in January 2020, before we knew it was happening. But now we had this natural experiment to test whether or not these teachings could really help you in a much yuckier time. And so again, so now all students have gone into lockdown. We're now testing the effects of this class during lockdown. We had those fall 19 students who took it, they're done, but they're also going through the pandemic. The spring 2020 students who are taking it as lockdown happens, and another waitlist control who are students who then subsequently enrolled in the summer version of the same class. And here's what Bruce is finding. Unfortunately, we don't have the pretest for the summer students, but here's what we find. So these are the fall 2019 people. They start and they're a little bit higher than before, but by May 2020, they're going down. Interestingly, there's still a benefit to taking the class because they're not as low as the kind of students who haven't taken it yet. But what's really cool is the act of taking this class in the middle of the pandemic meant that these students didn't really show the same subsequent well-being drop that most students are showing. In collaboration with Bruce and others, we're actually testing this out even further. He now has a 2021 cohort that's back to taking the class live, and the university has allowed him to kind of follow up, not just at the end of the course, but 6 weeks later. And we're now tracking these students over time. And the nice thing is they're actually pre-registering students really far in advance, so we get these waitlist controls that we can look out at. And what we're finding, even as far as a 6-week follow-up, again, these results don't stay perfect, but they wind up showing still a protective effect that you're not seeing in students who haven't taken the content, which is really exciting. So all this goes to say, it seems like we're actually moving the needle, and we're moving the needle about as much as we would expect given these other interventions, which is cool. But what we're realizing is that we don't want to just affect happiness in adults and college students. We need to affect happiness much younger. Sadly, most of those terrifying statistics I just quoted for you are true in high school students as well. We're seeing rates of high school students experiencing depression between 30 and 40%, depending on the survey. Anxiety is even higher, and loneliness is just as high, even in high school students. And things have gotten worse since the pandemic. And so we had an opportunity during the pandemic to partner with this group, the National Education Equity Lab, who works with low-income high school students to give them college credit courses. And they reached out to us and said, hey, could we offer your science of well-being class across these low-income high school students around the US? And so we said, yes, that sounds fabulous, but we also want to make sure we can test whether or not it's working to improve their well-being. And so we had a team of TFs from Yale who work with these students to give out the content. These are the folks the researchers, as well as the TFs who are kind of helping out with this. But what we were able to do is give this content out to these high school students at the National Education Equity Lab. And we measured them versus other AP Psych students to see if this content was actually helping them. And here's what we find from before taking this high school version of the class, so live in-person version of the class, versus after. The control group is just other AP Psych classes. Unfortunately, given the low-income status of the school, we didn't actually get many control groups reporting back. But the data that we were able to get basically showed that this intervention of teaching high school students this content, even in a small sample, was sort of showing an effect. So we said, oh, this would be great if we could give this content out to high school students for free around the world. Now, luckily, programs like the John Templeton Foundation have helped us to do that. We were able to create a teen version of our Science of Wellbeing that has some of the same content. The course runs across 6 weeks where you get content where we teach you misconceptions about happiness, why our minds are so bad. So they're really learning the basics of psychology, things like reference points and so on. And then the last 3 weeks are really sort of thinking about ways that we can improve our flourishing and how to put those strategies into practice. And at the end, students have an optional 4 weeks that they can engage in to kind of engage in one of these practices themselves. We call it our rewirement challenge. So we can kind of check in on how they're doing across those 4 weeks. And so how it's going so far, you heard the kind of prelude, but it's pretty good. In just over a year or so of launching, we have over 100,000 learners. And maybe more so than the number of learners that sign up is the fact that learners are really liking this, which especially for high school students, I'm very proud of these kind of reports. One of my favorite ones was like, it doesn't feel cringe or strange. Like, it's like, great, we're not feeling cringe or strange. We're still in the ongoing process of testing students because we actually really do want to do these longitudinal follow-ups of students, and we haven't had much time yet, but so far they seem to be enjoying it. And many of them are saying, it's helping them, right? But we want to check empirically whether it's helping them. The other arm of our current project is to get this content out to teachers. We've developed this teaching hub online where teachers can come and get special kind of access to this content, but can also join a community of teachers who are using the content themselves. And teachers opt in to share the lesson plans that they're creating, or the kind of the different kind of scales that they're using, or the kind of assignments that they're giving, and so on. We're basically creating this huge database of all kinds of content that teachers can just go to and off the shelf get stuff to use with their students. And the stats so far on this part is pretty impressive too. We have over 1,000 teachers that have been using the Teacher Hub. And again, this, if you translate this, is impressive. This is 6,000 teachers times 50 to 100 students in their classroom, times on average about 30 to 50 assignments that they're posting up there, right? So it's becoming this amazing database. In addition, we've tried to sort of develop smaller communities for teachers. So we set up an opt-in Facebook group where we've had 200 teachers on there who are regularly posting and sort of sharing their notes. We also, through the Teacher Hub, give access to the content on YouTube. And it seems like teachers don't necessarily want to sign up and be part of something, but they're definitely watching this content when it's kind of geared towards teachers on YouTube, which is pretty cool. And what's even more impressive for us is we kind of check our kind of quarterly growth. And what we're finding is that we're getting 30% more teachers who are joining this as the quarters go on, which is cool. I was worried we'd get a kind of first blast of like, oh, Yale's offering this course, and then it would kind of die down over time. But if anything, we seem to be getting, by word of mouth from the teachers, more and more engagement. And so this has been really cool, and people outside of us think it's been really cool. We've kind of been a little bit viral in the national news of talking about it. So we're getting great coverage of the fact that we're doing this course, which, and every time we're going to get one of these, we get more of a bump up in people signing up. But other people are kind of recognizing it. I was humbled to find out that I was nominated as, or not nominated, but won as one of the Mental Health 2023 champions, me and Selena Gomez. But it was largely for the work on this teen class, of the idea of getting this content out to younger and younger learners, which I think speaks to the fact that people care about this the most. But as alluded to at the beginning, one of the coolest things, the kind of tendrils that come out of you funding one thing, but it winds up bringing stuff that's much bigger, is because of the press that we've been getting for the teen class. I got reached out to by Sesame Street, who, if you don't know, is doing a lot of work. I mean, you know Sesame Street, but if you don't know the specific thing about Sesame Street, they've been, since COVID-19, doing a lot to support family emotional well-being, but specifically kids' emotional well-being. And they basically asked, okay, given your expertise, could we come up with something that we could do to improve flourishing in 3 to 6 year olds? And so we're currently working on a bunch of different projects. So I'm immediately heading out of here to go to New York to meet with the folks at Sesame Workshop for some TV shows that are coming out for 3 to 6 year olds, a special curriculum that I'm working on them with. The thing that we've had so far, and I think what you're referring to, is we had the Sesame Street characters come on my podcast, The Happiness Lab. That was not fake. That's not Photoshop. I got to hang out with them, and lots to say about posing with those guys. It was the only photo shoot I've ever done where people didn't care what I look like at all, but they really cared that. But the idea here of putting this up is not necessarily even to talk about this per se, but just again to note that the kind of funding decisions you make can have this cascade effect, right? You're putting people out there who can get connections that might be beyond the foundation. And the reach of, we've had an incredible reach so far that I'm really proud of, but the hope is that the reach that we get through a partner like this could be even better. So with all of that, I will wrap up. I hope I've convinced you that this class has extended far and wide, that we can kind of port people above the barrier and kind of above the line when it comes to human flourishing. And thank you so much for the opportunity to do that.